Our next panel is a conversation with the Nevada legislators that helped craft our Nevada Institute of Teaching and Educator Preparation. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Joyce Woodhouse, State Senator for the Nevada's 5th District, and I believe that's up there, and State Assemblywoman Brittney Miller for Nevada's 5th District for a conversation moderated by Brad Marianno, PhD, Assistant Professor, UNLV College of Education.
It's really bright.
Yeah, it's right, pretty bright.
All right, it's good to be here. We thank Assemblywoman Miller and Senator Woodhouse for being here to chat education policy today. I'll just start off with a broad question. The 2019 legislative session is almost upon us, opening day. I feel like we sometimes treat it as like baseball season is starting or something like that. So I'm just curious, in your opinion, what are you looking forward to most for the 2019 session?
Okay, I will start first. Actually, I think probably 2 points I would like to make regarding this. One, this next legislative session is, I think, going to be different. I have been in the legislature since 2007, and because of the changes that have happened during this last election in November, I think we'll see different kinds of things happen. So I'm looking forward to that. All of my sessions have been really positive, but I think this will be a new one. And then the other thing that we have talked about so much this morning is the fact that we are going to move forward to make sure that we address the issue of the Nevada plan. Dr. Jara mentioned this morning that what came into being in 1967, which is over 50 years ago, and it is long overdue for a total remodel, whether it is throw it out, start over, or take a look at what pieces we need to keep and go on from there. And later on, if you want, in this hour, I can talk about the kinds of things that we're looking at doing. But I'm really looking forward to us finally addressing this issue because it is so important for our students, our teachers, our schools, and our school districts across the state.
I would also like to add to what Senator Woodhouse said, is that one of the things that I see for the first time since I've lived in the state of Nevada, I see a true energy around supporting public education and making sure that that Nevada plan gets changed. And I see that energy not just from educators, but from parents, from students. Everyone in the state is actually rallying around this issue, and it's the #1 issue right now. We know that we see nationally an energy and a movement happening around education, and I really believe that here in Nevada we're going to benefit from that as well. So we're going up. A lot of times it feels like, and last session was my first session, this will be my second session, it sometimes feels like you're up there by yourself, kind of leading the way and heading the charge, but this time it's not just the stakeholders, it's community members, business owners, people in the neighborhoods, people without kids, just Nevadans in general, and I think that we're all going to benefit from that energy.
So just to reset the conversation on, let's talk about school funding since we brought that up. So we've kind of tinkered around the edges in the last few legislative sessions. In 2009, we had the room tax initiative. 2015, there was a moderate increase in the local school support tax. We had the increased funding for kindergarten students, and then 2016 ballot question 2 with the marijuana tax. And so we've made some small changes in your mind for this legislative session. Is it, you briefly mentioned, is this a massive overhaul? Do we need to tinker around the edges some more? What do we need to do to the Nevada plan?
I would say that it's a massive overhaul, and that's what we're looking at doing. You mentioned a number of things. Others that are part of that whole picture are in 2013, we provided additional dollars for our Zoom schools, which are our students who are needing additional support because they do not speak English when they come into school. And then in 2015, we continued the Zoom program, and we added the Victory Schools, which address schools where students who live in poverty also need additional resources. And through the morning, we heard our speakers talk about these students need extra resources in the classrooms in order for them to sometimes catch up, sometimes to learn another language, but to be successful in school so they can move on with the rest of their classmates. And then this last and the other thing we did too was additional dollars for special education. I know when I was teaching years ago, one of the things that happened with special ed was because we have federal mandates, but are not totally funded, and so we would have to take money from the state's general fund in order to fund our special ed units. We put additional dollars into special ed so that we are addressing the needs of those students. And then this last session, we crafted Senate Bill 178, which addressed and provided additional dollars of $1,200 for students who are in the bottom quartile in our 1- and 2-star schools and some of our 3-star schools. So in looking at all of those pieces, all the way from tax increases to special programs we funded up to today, what we're looking at is how do we design a system that is going to address what we need to for our students who need additional resources, as well as making sure that we continue to raise the bar so that our students in school are achieving at the level that we want them to.
So the legislature commissioned a study from some outside consultants this year that suggested that we'd have to increase per pupil funding by about 70% to actually meet this level of adequacy. So when you think about school funding changes, where are we going to find the money to? We're not going to get 71% by no stretch of the imagination, but how do we find the dollars to be able to do this?
Okay, I'll
Chair of
take
Senate
it.
Finance.
It can't be done overnight. What we have to do first is build the system, the structure that we need to deliver the funding that is necessary so that school districts across the state, whether they be urban, mostly urban, like the Clark County School District is, as well as our small rural districts. So in looking at all of these things that we've done, in looking at the study that you mentioned, which really what it did was it updated a study that was done in previous years so that we were back on track as to where education needs are now. But we do have to build the structure. We have to build in a timeline for things to happen because we cannot come up with billions of dollars in one fell swoop. When we build that structure, I think our communities across the state will better understand what we need to do to get the kind of dollars that we need to put into that funding formula so that student needs are being addressed.
And if I could add, partly the reason why, by changing the mechanism itself, will allow for a broader flow of dollars into the school districts. Right now, we know that one of the challenges that we have is that there's so much money that is supplanting and not supplementing. So that in itself, by changing that mechanism, when we hear about all of these additional taxes, the room tax, the marijuana tax, all of these things that we believe should be supplementing and going on top of and in addition, but right now while things are supplanted, it means that the more money that goes out, more money's being pulled back out and it's never actually increasing. So that would be a number one structure or mechanism of that structure, that changing right there that would allow more dollars.
Great. Senator Woodhouse, you mentioned SB 178, which was kind of our first effort to move towards a weighted student funding formula. What do we, and that goes to 2019, so what do we need to do in this upcoming session, if anything, to address, do we need to move fully to a weighted student funding formula where we provide more money for English language learners, for our homeless students?
Well, I definitely believe that that's what we need to do. And just to take the weighted funding issue back a few years, back in 2014, Senator Dennis chaired a study committee, and we had outside researchers to assist us. And one of the things that we found, which has now been updated by the Augenblick study that just happened this last year, but we found that with our EL students, the weight needs to be around 1 to 1.5. Children in poverty, the same, 1 to 1.5. And at the time, we were looking at special ed at a 1 to 2.0. Now we have found that both children in poverty and EL students could be, under the new revised, could be like at a 1 to 1.4 along in there. But special ed is more than a 1 to 2.0. It's closer to a 2.3, 2.4. We also have to look at gifted and talented, because that's another part of the spectrum of our student population, and we have to make sure that we're addressing the needs of those children. And then with the SB 178, that was addressing any students who are not in Zoom or Victory or special ed, that we were providing additional dollars for them, and that's why we put in an additional $1,200 per student. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough money to address every child across the state of Nevada that is below, is in that bottom quartile. And so that's one of the things that has to be a part of the discussion, is getting these dollars to every single student who falls in these various categories, so that we are providing, number one, the highly qualified teacher, and then the resources for those schools and those teachers to really deliver the programs that they need.
So the Clark County Education Association released a report in August or so, and called for the ability for the system to be able to raise local levies and keep those tax dollars within Clark County to be able to fund schools. Currently, under the Nevada plan, those are all aggregated up to the state level and then redistributed. What are your thoughts on moving, that's almost a move back towards a local levy system where those dollars could actually stay within Clark County School District?
Okay, I'll go first. We are very well aware of the CCEA proposal. In fact, it came to the Legislative Committee on Education, which both Assemblywoman Miller and I serve on as members. And so we have heard it. We have talked about it in briefings, and I'm sure it's going to come up during the session. At this point in time, I cannot tell you, because a lot of it depends upon, one, the study the work that we're doing on the Nevada plan, as well as what monies are available. And, you know, it's all of this. One of the things about the legislative process is it's 120 days of negotiations. And so we have to look at all of the needs of the state. We'll be particularly looking at education. What do we need to do? And so we're going to look at everything that comes up and see what is the best way to make all of this happen.
I would absolutely agree. But I think that having multiple strategies brought to the table actually, you know, strengthens our ability to come up with the best strategies that's going to work for everyone. So there's many ideas out there, and, you know, again, that's a great idea that, along with everything else that we'll consider.
Awesome. So I want to talk quickly about teacher recruitment and retention. We've heard about that throughout the day today. And so the Las Vegas Review-Journal had some statistics they cited recently where just under 20% of teachers in CCSD leave within 1 year, and approximately 30% after 3 years. So why do you think teachers are leaving the profession right now?
Well, as the person who just left the classroom like an hour ago,
She's going back tomorrow.
yeah, a negotiation every night, right? We know, those of us that have worked in education, you know, it honestly seems that there has been an attack on education for at least the last 2 decades. And I think in the last decade, we've really seen it gear up. I've been teaching, this is now my 8th year in the classroom. I became a teacher here after moving to Nevada and seeing the needs and hearing the narrative and everything that was going on. And I really felt drawn to do what I could do to help serve the public here in Nevada. And it's one of those things, I really believe that if we build it, they will come. And actually, if we restore it, it will come. We have to look at the fact that teachers used to stay in their profession for 35 to 40 years. And now the fact that if a teacher stays 5 years, we're celebrating them as, oh, wow, you've made it 5 years. We know that money is one, salary is not all of it, but we also have to look at the working conditions. And so the working conditions, when we have teachers, class sizes that are completely, you know, too big, along with all of the expectations and the testing and the evaluations and the lack of resources and support, that's given to individuals to, in some cases, perform miracles, it's just not a conducive environment for everyone all the time.
And there are many of you in this audience who have heard my story before, but I was recruited. We both came here from somewhere else. I was recruited when I graduated from Carroll College in Helena, Montana, to come here to be a first grade teacher. And I came here with 4 other young women, all 5 of us, to be teachers. 4 of us were elementary. My roommate was a middle school English and French teacher. That very first year was very, very difficult. I was the lucky one out of the 5 of us. I got a new school. I had a principal who, as well as two first grade teachers, there was only 3 of us in first grade at the time, who understood the need for mentoring new teachers. And those individuals, my principal and the other 2 teachers at my grade level, made sure that they shared their experiences and their resources, because I was making $5,500 a year that year, and still doing the same thing that our teachers do today, and that's buying resources for my classroom out of my own paycheck. But at the end of that first year, my 4 roommates went home, and they all stayed in education, but they got jobs in Montana and California and Washington State. That was really a crushing thing, and we continue to see that happen. But I think what Assemblywoman Miller has indicated, those are a lot of the issues, but I think we know some of the answers. Number 1, we've talked about earlier today, and that's mentoring our new teachers, and not just the first year. Continue that program. Second of all, working to make sure that we have the resources that those individuals need. And I just would like to throw out, when we were introduced, the Nevada Institute was brought up, and that is one of the bills that came. You saw the number, I think it was Senate Bill 548, which meant it was really the last week of the session when we introduced that bill, and it was a call from the governor to my office saying, would you consider putting this in? And I said, yes, of course. And so we worked together, we got the bill passed, and now we have this first cohort of young people who are interested in being teachers. And these are the best and the brightest, and that's one of the things that we have to continue to do, is to make sure that we are making every effort possible to have our community, our parents, to understand that education is a quality profession, and it's a good thing when their young women and men say, I want to be a teacher, that we support that and not say, oh no, you need to be an architect or you need to be an engineer. Yes, we need those people too, but we'll never have those people if we don't have wonderful teachers to begin with. So I just really, really appreciate that effort to have that bill passed.
And I would just like to add as well that ultimately, when we think about it in the profession, it's that so many educators do not feel respected or empowered as the skilled, trained, educated professionals that they are. And so I think, there was a time where we trusted our teacher and they were put up on a pedestal in society, and we really respected and believed the teacher. And we've come to a place now where the teacher is kind of the last person we believe, and the teacher is the person that we feel that we need to work against, or we can't believe or trust. And so we see what happens, not just in the profession, but in society as well. And I think that if it was to, a generalization of what it really is, it is the lack of empowerment, the lack of trust, the lack of respect, where I will say, and I've said it before and I'll always say it, the teaching workforce we have today is the most qualified, skilled, talented, equipped, educated teaching workforce we've ever had in this country. We run circles around the teachers. We have, those of you guys that are educators know that we do. We run circles around the teachers that we had. And so to come to a place where we have such high-skilled professionals and yet aren't always treated as such, that's really something that's systemic of the profession and something that impedes the retention.
Where would you move forward, looking forward to the way we evaluate teachers? What do we need to do there? Because part of it is recognizing what is good teaching and training our principals and our school leaders to be able to recognize that in classrooms and evaluate teachers fairly. What kind of policies do we need to put in place on the way that we evaluate our teaching workforce?
You get to go first.
The evaluation is one of the things about education, and I said I've only been teaching 8 years, so I haven't been a lifetime teacher. What I know about as a social scientist, there's one thing we all agree on in social science, and that's the only absolute 100% is that we can't control human behavior. And yet we come into education and they say you absolutely can control human behavior. And in fact, we're going to evaluate you on your ability to control the human behavior of 40 or 50 young people in your room coming from all different backgrounds and all different experiences and all different abilities. And so we don't take into account that teachers are actually, this is a live experiment happening every day in your classroom. We call doctors, we say doctors have a practice, lawyers have a practice, but teachers, the truth is we're practicing too every single day with all kinds of variables that we can't control. So one, I think that the evaluation has to align to the effort of the teacher and not necessarily the performance of the student. Because one thing we don't consider enough is that education is still a participatory event. We still have to actively participate and engage in our education. And so I think those are things, as well as the working conditions that aren't being considered. I know there are many people and groups that want to, again, revisit that conversation this session, that depending on how many students you have in your classroom, depending on the needs of the students that you have in your classroom, depending on the resources that you have, that those things should be taken into consideration. But ultimately, an evaluation should be evaluating things that the teacher has control over and not just everything that's happening in your classroom. And again, standardized test is not something that I believe that a one-day, one-shot should be a major part of a teacher's evaluation.
And I would add to what Brittany has stated. I think it's over the 50 years that I've been here, we have had a different kind of evaluation document that is being used to evaluate the ability of the teacher. I mean, there's probably one every 3 years. And so as a teacher, you go through this all the time of changing on how you're being evaluated. Brittany is absolutely right, and I would also add it is just paramount that when that school administrator, who is ultimately responsible to complete that evaluation on the teacher, that he or she spends the time in the classroom and spends time with the teacher in one-on-one conversations about what is going on in the classroom. What is the teacher doing? What are the challenges, and what are the winning days, so that evaluation reflects the entire gamut of that year, not just a one-time step in the classroom, see 20 minutes of instruction. That is not going to give you a real picture of what's going on in each classroom and what each teacher is delivering with their students. It's just, sometimes I don't think we put enough emphasis on that piece of teacher evaluations, and having been a teacher and an administrator who did evaluations of teachers, that was one of the things that I thought was the most important, was the time I spent in my teachers' classrooms with them while they were working with their students, so that I knew what they were doing, plus the fact that administrator has to know curriculum, has to know classroom management, so that they can see what's happening and understand why it's happening, the good, especially the good, as well as if there's any problems. So, it's always a work in progress. And I agree with Assemblyman Miller. We're going to see it again this session.
All right, thank you. So I want to move the conversation to school choice in the state of Nevada. We've seen the number of charters continually increase, charter school enrollment. Last year, CCSD attributed part of their $60 million deficit to the increase in charter enrollment in the state. So what role should school choice have moving forward in Nevada's education system?
Well, I believe that school choice is, and I guess I'll just use these words, it's a niche for certain students. When school choice first started here, it was, a school or two got started, and it's over the years has grown. And I think, one of the things, particularly the online charter schools or schools of choice, are ones that certain students, that is the best way for them to learn. And so it's incumbent upon parents to look at what is available in the public schools that their child is zoned for. If that's not what works for them, then look at what else is available, and then go from there. But one of the things that, again, is incumbent upon the parent is that you evaluate those schools to make sure that they are delivering what you need for your child, or what they need for their child. But there's a place in our educational system here in Nevada for school choice. I know that we provide public dollars for our charter schools, and that's well and good. We just have to make sure that everybody is on the same page and is following the same standards and the same evaluative processes.
I would agree. I just, with the charter schools, that it should just be the same level of accountability.
So what would that look like policy-wise? Like what do we need to do with our policies currently to make sure that we're holding all schools to the same standard?
Well, I know one thing that's happening now, and it's been in the news recently, and that is the Charter School Authority had the responsibility to do educational evaluative site visits to the charter schools. It didn't happen. And I think that my feeling is that the charter schools are at a disadvantage because that didn't happen. It is underway now, so my cup is always half full or 2/3 full, that it's going to happen now. The last legislative session, we did provide 4 additional positions for the Charter School Authority to get the right kind of people to do the research and get out in the field and do these evaluative visits. I have talked with the interim director at the authority, and it is my understanding that those visits will start in January and they'll be completed in June. And I think that will give especially the Charter School Authority and their board of directors an understanding of where they are and what they might need to do and who's doing well and who do they need to shore up. As far as the legislature is concerned, then it gives us the understanding of, same thing, where they are, where they need to go, because we are responsible for funding those charter schools along with our regular public schools.
I would add that the charter school, it's an interesting concept if you think about it. The irony is that charter schools, one of the advantages is that they have more autonomy. And so for the charter schools that are doing well and very strong and successful, they attribute that to their autonomy to be able to do it. It's, deregulated from all of the requirements that are on the traditional public school. And yet the question always is, if that autonomy is what is working, then why don't we grant the same autonomy to our traditional public schools to exercise in the same way? However that looks, then the ultimate question is still that we need to be, because oftentimes in the discussion, we're not actually comparing apples to apples. So to make sure that, that we're actually comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges, and that there is the same requirements and accountability for both.
Yeah, I think part of it comes down to our ability to evaluate and understand what autonomy that we're providing to charter schools might actually be producing results and which ones are not. So that's a good point. So I'm curious, we talked a little bit about school safety today, and I know Governor Sandoval's proposed budget moving forward funds some of the ideas on the school safety task force. Now, whether or not Governor-elect Sisolak will kind of stick to that is a different question. But I'm curious on your thoughts on what do we need to do moving forward to improve the safety of our schools?
Okay, well, I'll go. I'm really pleased that Governor Sandoval had the study group come up with their recommendations, and it is my understanding that, you know, the funding for his recommendations are in the budget that Governor-elect Sisolak will receive. I hope all of that goes through. Once again, it comes down to being able to fund it. I would share two things. One, after the Parkland tragedy, I guess is the best word to use, and our students across the country were marching and having town halls and all kinds of things to address this issue from their perspective, which was a really positive thing. And here in Southern Nevada, our students at our schools did the same thing, especially in the middle and high schools. And I had the opportunity to visit one of my high schools in my district on the day that the students went to march out in support of gun control and all of these various issues. The school principal utilized the student leaders in deciding what kind of a program they wanted to have to show, you know, what their concerns were. And what they decided to do was have an activity after, it was like a town hall, after school that day. And they were anticipating 150 to 200 students to attend. There were over 400 students who stayed after school to have their voices heard. And there was a group of us, legislators and representatives of our congressional folks, as well as school police and Henderson Police at the time. And the overriding statement from the students, and it was like 2 hours of student after student after student delivering a 1-minute presentation of what they thought needed to happen. And so along with what Governor Sandoval's study committee has, those students just, it was overwhelming. The need for more school counselors and the need for more social workers, because they didn't have enough people in their school that they could go to talk to. And that just really hit me, that we have to address that. So that evening, then the parents came in, smaller group, 75 to 100, maybe 125, and one of the things that happened too, the principal asked if the students in the afternoon session, if they knew about Safe Voice, which is where they can call in when they know something bad is going to happen, or they're being bullied, or you know, just a range of things. Basically, almost every student in that audience that afternoon knew about Safe Voice. Their parents did not. And that was something that the school administration said, we've got some work to do, and they moved forward on that. And as far as the legislature is concerned on this issue with the Safe Voice, we have provided additional dollars to the Nevada Department of Education to bring that program into play faster than was intended, with more support, because the calls have come in and they have to be answered.
I would add, in addition to the emotional safety of our students, because of course we know, and this is something that students are thinking about and talking about on a regular basis. The sad part is that our children today are growing up with thoughts that we couldn't have even ever fathomed. So when my students are like, well, Ms. Miller, when you were a kid and you had to, you know, do these drills, and to have to tell them, we didn't have these drills. I didn't have to do this when I was a kid. And so while we know that within our school climate and culture, there are things that we can change with increased social workers and increased counselors, which we are desperately low at, and making that environment emotionally safe. You know, our number one role, the way that we are designed as humans, the number one role of a mammal, if you want to get real general, is that adults' role is to protect the young, right? So in a school, that's our number one before anything else. Their safety comes first. We also have to look at the physical safety too, and we have to recognize that the situations that have happened in schools have not just happened from within the school. So there is the internal safety that needs to be adjusted with increased counselors and social workers, but also the external safety, and that would be around our buildings, our policies and procedures, some structural things that need to take place too. I know that Governor Sandoval had recommended in his proposed budget some money, and the school safety task force that worked together, we also heard during the interim committee some of their suggestions, which was a lot more elaborate and specific. I was happy to see that how inclusive it actually was. But there's so much more that you know, that we need to do, and I think that as much as we don't want to, we have to recognize that we are in a time where we have to consider the physical as well, and the policies and procedures around our students to keep them safe as well.
Great, thank you. So I'm curious, we heard from Andy earlier today that colleges of education need to step up and provide a stronger support to your work as legislators. And there's been in education policy research, there's been a growing number of research practice partnerships around the nation where academic communities are forming partnerships with legislatures to do the type of policy evaluative work that we need to understand what works and for who and how. But if you look at the Mountain West region, there's kind of a dearth of these types of research practice partnerships. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how do we as researchers best support the work that you do as legislators?
What you have indicated, I think, would be incredible to assist us. As you all know, the Nevada State Legislature only meets 120 days every 2 years. And so there's 18 months in between that we are doing interim work, and particularly in education, with legislators and coming up with bills for the next legislative session. But if there were some of these partnerships, I think that would be exceptional. But I do also have to say that every single time that I've called the UNLV College of Education needing a white paper on, the one that comes right to my mind immediately is the early childhood one, and others over the years, they have been so helpful in us being able to address what we need to do so that we can back it up with research and data, as well as get the stories of what is going on in our schools that we need to address. So I think now is the time and the place for us to take a look at some of these new ways of addressing education issues, because we all have to take a leadership role to make sure that we are addressing the needs of our students.
So I'm curious, in your day-to-day work, how often do you use research, or how do you use research? I was at one of these one time where a lawmaker says, "Oh, no, I never look at research. I don't have time." So I'm curious, from your perspective, like, how do you use and look at research in your work?
In our legislative work?
Yeah, correct.
Excuse me. I would say that we do. You know, we definitely want to make sure that we're using, you know, proven strategies, and that we have the correct data and information that we need. So there's always an area for more, but even with the study that we've done on, you know, we're not just making arbitrary decisions based on the whim of what we want or what we feel. There is, you know, research back to that.
And I would say, none of you want to see my email lists. I have 3 emails, and every day it's always going off. And I would say half of it is research coming in, or opinions coming in, various organizations coming forward with a paper that they have put together. And so I certainly look at those, and The other thing that we do have as legislators is we have an awesome research staff in Carson City that assists us when we get questions or we have a bill we want to propose, and what is the research behind this? What can you tell us what other states are doing in this area? I know we all use that, I would say daily. Maybe not everybody, but I think the vast majority of us use everything that we know of that's available so that we can have better pieces of legislation that we propose.
Great. So we'll move to audience questions too. I have some on the iPad here, but we can also use the mics as well. And so if you have burning questions, go ahead and line up. I'll also look at my list here. So here's a question. From the audience, what policy ideas can increase the capacity of building leaders to show meaningful instructional leadership?
Well, right now, there is an advisory council that is underway. That it was a bill passed the last legislative session. Actually, it was a proposal from Nevada Succeeds that we moved along, and we are working on recommendations that will go to the State Board of Ed addressing educational leadership, management, particularly addressing what do we need to have our school administrators be most proficient at in order to deliver and to be the leaders in their buildings that they should be. Hopefully we'll be finished in January.
All right, let's go to microphone over here.
Thank you for taking my question. You have a room filled with people with a strong interest in education. Can you give us your best advice on the best strategies for educational advocacy that would support your positions going into this next legislative session? What are the best strategies?
Sure. The best strategies, I believe, are, excuse me, one, to make sure that you are, coming together as a group. Obviously, joint forces are much stronger than singular forces, but to make sure, one of the things here we have in Nevada that's such an advantage that we know we don't have in most states is your accessibility to your electeds. And that is something that is truly unique to Nevada, that you can reach out, you can call, you can email. We will come and meet you for coffee. We'll talk to you, have a discussion with you, but also your ability to come to actually testify in front of the legislature. Everything that you do to advocate, down to an email, to a phone call, all of that, as well as presenting, all of that makes a difference. I think that there are a lot of different groups that we've seen that are uniting, that are really becoming strong. And so I think that maybe kind of joining forces with some of those groups, because ultimately we're all going after the same things. We know that some of the top things that we're hearing in Nevada is more funding, smaller class sizes. So we know that we're all kind of on the same page, even if we think there's ultimately different ways to get there. And also to do it in order to get everyone on the same page, we have to have a positive message. And that's one of the things when I was talking earlier about the energy changing that I see here in Nevada. My first, I would say, 9 years in the state, all I've heard was teacher bashing, bashing the educators, bashing the school districts. And now it's changed to, well, do you understand what they're trying to work with? Do you understand what the conditions are? Do you understand what's really going on? And so I think if we do it, and to make sure that it's positive, that's going to ultimately go a lot further.
And I totally agree with everything that Assemblywoman Miller has said. Very, very important. In fact, a couple of you have come up to me today to schedule a meeting because you have an issue that you want to talk about, particularly I know one of them that's on the top of my mind right now is we're going to have a meeting on the need for more school counselors. But what I also want to say is, in addition to the getting in groups and that sort of thing, and make sure that we are getting your message, always, pick up the telephone once the legislature starts. And actually, Brittney will have an attaché in her office starting the first part of January. I will have a legislative assistant. Our phone in Carson City will be up and running at that point. They're not right now. And so they will take messages all through the sessions. They'll do that. We will answer emails. We will, if you're in Carson, absolutely schedule an appointment and come in and talk to us. And if it's a group of 10, fine. Or if it's just one, that's fine. We want to hear from you. Also, when you're testifying, a lot of organizations or individuals don't let us know because they think they have to fly to Carson City. I know, and the plane tickets are terrible. But we're more than welcome to go to the Sawyer Building and testify because we're trying to use that system to its fullest advantage with small rooms that are set up and as well as the larger rooms that are set up. Because it's important that your messages, whether they be personal stories or whether they be research or data that you could provide to us, that helps us do a better job. So the communication lines need to be open, and we will address those. I would say the thing that is very difficult to deal with is if a group does an automated email that is exactly the same message and it's 100, or if it's 200, or if it's 1,000, we can't deal with that. We don't have the time, we don't have the staff to do that. So we want to know from you why it's important that we say yes or no on this bill, or if you have an amendment for it, you don't like one part of it. We need to know that. Just signing up for blanket emails really is not the best use of your time or ours. But I ask you, do be an advocate for the things that you believe in.
I would add to that with those blanket emails, and those are the ones that a lot of times a lot of advocacy programs or groups have, and literally we'll get in one night 400 or 500 of them. But the other challenge is it doesn't give your personal return information. So then sometimes when I'm responding back, I don't even know if that individual's getting it. The other thing is if people send a mass email to like every single legislator, it kind of becomes like a stone soup. It's like, well, Joyce, are you on this, or am I on this? Who is this? And so, not that you can't copy and paste, we all certainly copy and paste. But so copy and paste that email and send it individually so it looks like it was individually sent. I'd also say you don't have to be elaborate. There are many times where I've gotten emails that literally say, please vote yes on, or please vote no on. And so even if you don't have this whole, all these different reasons and points, it's still, we're hearing, what the public wants on it. The other thing is that when you come to testify, oftentimes those of you who have participated in the process, sometimes those hearings run long, and sometimes there could be a few hundred people lined up between Carson and Grant Sawyer to speak. And sometimes the chair has to literally cut it off and say, you know what, we don't have time we apologize, we don't have time to get to everyone, but show of hands, or please stand up if you're here to support or oppose this. Even that visual, when you see the whole room stand up on one side of the issue, we get the message. But the most important thing is that we know what people want, because oftentimes I've sat through bill hearings where it's now like, so who's in opposition, or who's supporting this? And there's literally no one in the room. And so you're like, why do we have a bill and there's not one soul in Nevada because again, the impression is there's not one soul in Nevada that cares about this. So it's highly important that you are participating and reaching out and letting us know.
Great, let's go to this microphone.
Hi, I have a quick question on, prior to this panel, there was a lot of robust conversation around early childhood education and the importance that it plays for our kids as an intervention service, as well as how we've made a lot of improvements here in Nevada around early childhood and preschool. And while we've made those improvements, unfortunately, only 12% of kids have access to either a state-funded special education or a Head Start program, meaning that the rest of our kids are either in paid-for preschool programs and or have no access at all. What is the state legislature going to do in the 2019 session to actually help implement greater access? Are we including this in the funding formula, since there's been a lot of discussion around that, or is there other ways that we can fund this so that we can support kids early?
Well, the one area that I can address is pre-K. For example, the Nevada Department of Education has had a grant from the federal government to fund pre-K for 3,000 students. 3,000 young people in pre-kindergarten. Unfortunately, the funding for that grant is running out, and we don't have an opportunity this go-around to add to it. The good news is that Governor Sandoval has put the funding in his proposed budget to continue the program for those 3,000 children. And then the other piece is we want to grow the program. It's expensive, but I do have a BDRN to increase for an additional 1,500 students, children, in the pre-K program. It's one of the things that we're just going to have to do piece by piece and adding year to year in order to start addressing our students across the state of Nevada. So I hope my colleagues will support that bill when it comes forward. And I hope that Governor-elect Sisolak continues the recommendation that Governor Sandoval has in his proposed budget.
All right.
Hi, Mary Alber from the Education Innovation Collaborative. I first want to thank you so much for the hard work and insight that both of you have contributed to this future of Nevada's education, and especially excited about the chance to restructure the funding and maybe start from scratch and how that builds up. One of my questions is that there's a couple programs I'm aware of that could be really instrumental in turning the tide on the education quality for Nevada, including the Nevada Ready 21 program and the Competency-Based Education Network. I'm not hearing too much about how those programs might be supported in terms of really transforming how learning happens at the personalized, competency-based, experiential, technology-enabled. You know, a lot of the strategies we know that are effective to reach every student where they are and in their abilities. Can you speak to what you see might be coming down the road in those programs to support them?
I believe that Senator Dennis has a bill this session regarding competency-based education. You agree? I know that we heard testimony on it when the legislative committee was meeting over the interim. So I do expect to see a bill on that one. And I can't remember what was the other part of your question?
Nevada Ready 21.
Oh, Nevada Ready 21. That's been in our budget for the last few legislative sessions. I anticipate it to continue, assuming that the Department of Ed put it back in when they made their recommendations to the governor. I don't know, because we don't get the budget till January. So we're just gleaning pieces that leak out as to what is included, but Nevada 21 has been there, and so I anticipate it will continue. Haven't heard anything more.
And this is one of those areas where in education we don't like to say that it all comes down to funding, but so much of it comes down to funding. And so when we're talking about all these additional programs and strategies and opportunities for students and educators, again, we have to make sure that it's an environment that's conducive for that to be successful. And so making sure that we have the funding mechanism so that educators have, one, the resources, and that class sizes are appropriate at a class size that is, appropriate, conducive to learning. It's more than just saying, oh, this is a great program or this is a great idea, let's do it. Because we also know when we implement them in the same situations, in the same environment, they're not as successful as they should be. So it's really taking a holistic approach at our state education system in our school districts to ensure that as these things are implemented, that they can actually thrive.
And just one point on the AB 110 is the Competency-Based Education Network. It was actually passed last session, but no funding. So I'm working with the schools that are trying to implement it, but they don't have any support in order to do it. So it's really hard for the innovators in the state to really succeed and show what's possible if they don't have adequate, funding and support. So
you are absolutely correct.
Okay.
And the unfunded mandates are really outrageous here in the state. And it does put a burden on the school districts and the educators to deliver what's expected without having the funding or ability or resources to do so. You are absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Dan Price. I'm a teacher up at Sunrise Mountain High School. I want to know where you guys stand on dedicated funding for teachers. So when you guys implement in the budget that there's money that's supposed to go to educators for pay raises and benefits, and then the school districts take it and use it the way they want to, what do you guys feel about making that money dedicated, that that money has to go to the educators?
What's an answer? I was just gonna, no. I was going to say, I know there's a lot of discussion and that there are groups that are at least and speaking just specifically for Clark County schools, to making sure, even if it's not specific written into law that it's just for staff salaries or teacher salaries, but to make sure that there's a certain, I've read what CCEA has, and I know there's other groups, about having the more flexibility and ability within the school districts to ensure that it goes to teacher salary.
And I think earlier in the discussion, that was one of the questions from our moderator. CCEA has made that proposal. We heard about it at the Legislative Committee on Education, and it's going to be part of the entire discussion that we have on school funding.
Good afternoon. My name is Paul Kleeman. I teach at Del Sol High School, and my wife's also a teacher. And last session, we passed SB 178, and some of the unintended consequences of schools that made adequate growth, like they lost all their funding. So my wife's school in in northern Las Vegas, made growth, was on the Rising Stars list, and then lost 9 teachers last school year because they made adequate growth. So we're rewarding them for doing well, but then penalizing them the next year with taking away all supports. So are we going to look at ways to address this moving forward so it doesn't happen to other schools?
And you're absolutely correct, because one of the things is we have to change our culture around how we look at funding and education, because the fact that those additional resources helped improve things proves that additional funding helps improve. I know one of the first things when we, it just does. When we look at Zoom and Victory schools and even our magnet schools and CCSD, one of the first things we do is we're like, okay, well, we need extended minutes per day and extended days per year and smaller class sizes and all these kinds of things that, yes, because that's what helps improve education. And when that money is just taken away, it's like the rug is pulled out from under you. And so what do we expect is going to happen? We saw the increase because there was the additional funding and resources. I know that I've spoken with the district about in those things, especially as we go to change the mechanism of funding, to make sure that there is some hold harmless put in place, that we're not just pulling and ripping funding from schools and then we're right back where we started from, because we know in many of those areas the environment's not going to change, the students aren't going to change, they're still always going to have those specific needs. When we fund education adequately, we wouldn't have the need for so many different kind of patch jobs and Band-Aids to education. So that is something we will be looking at, as well as with the 170, I'm forgetting the word, not dedicated. 178. I'm slipping right now at the end of the day, but making sure that the funding before, where we just, excuse me, I'm totally slipping.
That's okay.
Not dedicated, what's the other D?
Categorical?
No, D.
Okay.
The funding that
Let me add something, and
Okay,
then we'll let Brittney think about what she wants to say. When we are looking earlier in this hour, we were talking about changes in the Nevada plan, and part of that is to look at SB 178. It had its pluses, it has its minuses. You just identified the minus. We weren't expecting that to happen, and it did, or we didn't look far enough ahead or something. It was just one of those things was, oh no. So all of that is part of the big picture that we are studying at this point, and the bills that are going to come forward, probably about 3 of them, addressing the Nevada plan, we will be working to fix what happened with 178.
I guess the word I'm looking for is just weighted funding.
Yes, weighted
Weighted funded, period. With the weighted funded formula, we know it didn't go far enough as well, that it didn't reach enough schools. And so I know that that was proposed in Governor Sandoval's proposal as well, to make sure that that remains and should be increased, because what we also saw with the challenges is that when we said the money should follow the student, and then there wasn't enough money, so then it became, well, they should follow the student in schools that are only 1 or 2 star schools. And yet those people teaching in 4 and 5 star schools recognize that there are still students that have a lot of needs and need the additional resources as well. But yes, that is definitely a serious issue that needs to be.
Awesome. So our hour is up already. So we need good policy in the state of Nevada. We've touched on some issues today, and certainly we'll be looking forward to the 2019 legislative session. But I want you to join me in thanking Senator Woodhouse and Assemblywoman Miller for joining us.